There are reports that a small plane has crashed into a house in Clarence Center.
And all of a sudden we have no response to that aircraft.
There's nothing that any of us could have done or said to make it not happen.
It's Groundhog Day, and we'll be back in D.C. again.
I hope they never forget Kevin and Ellie and Mary, Abraham, and all the other victims that were lost that night, and the contribution that we lost that they could have made to this world.
Well, tonight, Buffalo's Electric Tower is just one of many Western New York landmarks lit up in red to honor the 51 lives lost in the crash of Flight 3407 in Clarence 10 years ago tonight. A lot has changed since that fateful evening, but one thing has remained a constant: the legacy and impact every single one of those people have left in this community we all call home. My colleague Scott Levin is live in Clarence tonight. Scott, you were right there in this studio as that tragic night was unfolding. A very different night tonight, Scott.
Yeah, that was 10 years ago, about an hour ago, Mary Alice, you're right. And it's hard to believe that it's been 10 years. And what's really eerie is that the weather tonight is almost the same as it was that night. It was just a little bit colder. There was a little bit more ice that was in the air that night. I remember walking into the studio that night around 11:15, and we had heard that there may have been a small plane crash, possibly in Clarence or maybe in Akron, and we thought it must have been like a crop duster. Maybe it landed in a farmer's field. But we quickly learned once we got on the air at 11 o'clock by text messages and phone calls that I was receiving while we were broadcasting that it was not a crop duster. In fact, it was a major commercial airliner with 49 people on board. One in the home behind me, Doug Walensky, who also perished, and an unborn child. In total, 51 people perished on that fateful night. It's a night that I will never forget. My wife called me during one of the quick breaks, and she said she's never heard so many sirens that night. She looked out the window, she saw smoke, and she saw some light also, which of course was some of the fireball that evening. But joining me now, I want to bring in my colleague, Kelly Dudzik. Kelly was down at the church in Clarence Center just a little while earlier when the family and friends met for that service.
Yeah, there was a remembrance ceremony in Scott, and what we heard over and over tonight is that it's through this sacrifice that all these families have made that all of us are safer every time we fly now. The pastor who was at Zion Lutheran Church in 2009 returned to that church tonight to lead tonight's ceremony, reflecting on what it was like that night to respond to the crash. We also heard from a crisis response team member from the Red Cross who spoke about how she's come to know the families first through their grieving and now through their activism. The lieutenant governor reflected on the strength she's seen come from this tragedy and the work the families have done in Washington. And we also heard from the former head of the NTSB who talked about how grateful she is for all the work the families have done in Washington.
Let me express my appreciation to you. This investigation and my association with you is a highlight of my life, personally and professionally. And until I moved last month, I don't have an office anymore in Silicon Valley, by the way. Until I moved last month, I had an office. And your signed 3407 poster that you gave me hung in my office. And I was reminded of you every day.
And that work, Scott, that they do in Washington is not done. They continue going back each and every year, the families on their own dime, to make sure these pilot safety standards are not rolled back.
Yeah, they are quite a tight-knit group. They become a small family, in essence.
They have. That's what they said tonight.
Kelly, thank you. I appreciate that. And Mary Alice, I'll tell you this, that it was an impressive group tonight. I'd say at least an estimate of 150 people. And also there were first responders that were here tonight as well. Now, as Kelly mentioned, during the last 10 years, the families of the victims, they, of course, have been relentless and successfully fought for laws to ensure that these skies are safer for all of us to fly each and every day. The Aviation Safety Bill passed back in 2010, which tightened the rules on pilot training, experience, even the rest hours, rules that airlines were not happy to have in place. They continue to this day keeping us safe. Lawmakers said yesterday that these exact laws are laws that the group fought so hard for. They are the reason that no commercial passenger plane has crashed in the past decade. Now tonight, those family members left that church service, and here I was able to speak to a few of them after the moment of silence.
Being at the site is hard. 10 years later, everything just kind of floods back, and the emotions are pretty raw. But the meeting or the ceremony that we were just at had a lot to do with hope, and makes me feel hopeful. Makes me feel like I can tell my kids that whatever they experience in their lives, hope can come out of it. And I feel like these families have demonstrated that for my kids, and that's pretty neat.
When there hasn't been another crash in 10 years, we lost one person on that Southwest flight last year, but not another crash in the United States. That's meaningful change, and we're very proud of it, and we believe that the people that we lost on the flight that night are proud